Good day, folks. This is Talking Point here on WESN, your content capital. Sean Michael Small here once again to speak with you about the important issues of the day. No co-host with me, hashtag re-release Keisha. But the show must go on. And the ongoing saga courtroom drama continues, as well as some other stories, ongoing sagas that should be familiar to us all. And I think I'm going to use, well, their continuation as an excuse to continue one of the points that I have been making ongoing this week, and one could argue since the inception of this show. What am I speaking about? Well, of course, let's kick off today's Daily Review. And the first thing that I want to get into is the cross-examination of the state witness, WPC Nicole Clement. The lead defense attorney, or its lead defense senior counsel, Israel Khan, was cross-examining the witness, where he brought up a signed statement that she apparently, or was apparently given to the DPP's office, signed by her, which contradicts the deposition that was read when she refused to testify this week, Monday and Tuesday. And now, yesterday, Senior Counsel Israel Khan, he brought up a statement signed by her, which gives a different account to what just happened. Well, not just happened, sorry, but what happened when the individuals were murdered by, allegedly, the sixth accused. In the first instance, a deposition from an earlier part of the trial was read when she refused to answer questions. And if you've been reading the papers for the last 2 days, it had things that basically implied that she was afraid, she was going with the flow, one squad, one song. She was following orders, and she named names of people who called the shots. And the witnesses, not the witnesses, the victims were afraid that they were going to be killed, and they were taken to somewhere secluded to do just that. But the signed statement, again, it has her signature, right? Apparently, it paints a different picture, where she was the one calling the shots, where she was the one that not just called the shots, but apparently threatened some of the other officers to get it done, to divert the two survivors from the police shooting, from going to a hospital to get treatment, to a secluded area, in order to kill them off. Allegedly. Now, what makes it interesting here is, first of all, it's curious as to why she did not speak for herself in this instance. Up front, Monday and Tuesday. Now she's being given a contradictory set of statements that, again, coming from her, this is not somebody else's testimony, apparently or allegedly, because it has his signature on it. That is what the senior counsel presented in the trial. So she's not willing to clarify the matter. And I find this all very interesting, because in the first instance, it seems as though she's providing testimony in order to get her immunity. But the senior counsel brings up the fact that this statement apparently was to provide testimony in order to shield some of the other police officers, right? To prevent them from taking blame. And it leaves one to ask, which is the truth? Is it that she was just following orders? Was it that she was the shot caller herself? Is it somewhere in the middle? Or is it none of the above? Is everything so far a complete obfuscation of the truth? And we are going to be left wondering, which is why I go back to the question I just asked. Why is it that she was not willing to speak? I would wonder, to some extent, if her immunity deal is still valid, whether or not she is going to essentially end her participation in the matter. Will her immunity deal continue? And what are the implications of her not speaking, not wanting to respond, not wanting to clarify when the defense counsel has a contradictory set of statements, which now leaves the interpretation of her testimony being in doubt? Because obviously both series of events can't be true. Both accounts of events can't be true. But assuming that, you know, again, all of the chain of evidence and everything was above board, and she literally gave two different versions of what happened that day, officially, one in a signed statement, one within the preliminary inquiry, I believe. Where does that leave us? And where does that leave this case? And there's a further implication with regards to if her inconsistent testimony undermines the case, one must ask if that was potentially an intention all along, or perhaps the situation has overwhelmed her, somebody got into contact with her, threats could have been made. She did say that she was afraid for her safety on Monday. Has there been any effort to look into these things to ascertain its veracity? Because it hasn't reached that point yet. But I don't know what the rest of you would think of if this case just falls out underneath the duality of the different mediums where she made statements and the duality of her differing accounts. But if it does, I personally now can't just assume that there's nothing going on here, that it's all benign and it's just a difficult witness. She's a police officer. It doesn't matter how experienced she is, she should have at least some amount of idea of what's going on. And more importantly, one would assume she wants an immunity deal. The state would prep her, would explain to her, this is what's going to happen. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. Go through the various scenarios reasonably, so that we don't get in a situation where a main witness, I mean, she was granted immunity, so this is not some ancillary, luxurious witness that is, you know, not central to the case. If they had more than enough evidence central to the case, one would imagine they wouldn't need to give her immunity. They would just chuck her with the other 6 and charge her and have her face the same trial that the other 6 are facing. By granting her immunity, she, from this entire situation, she essentially is scot-free from whatever punishment she should take based on her participation. So that's not a small deal. So how did it reach to this point? Again, this assumes that everything that has been presented to the court for the most part has been, you know, correct. She did sign this statement. It was her account at the time, and that statement that she signed, I believe, was written all the way in April the 3rd. And that statement was in the hands of the DPP. So how is it that the prosecutors allowed her to give testimony that differed? So I don't know if there will be a redirect, further explanation today, and I hope there is. That would be the simplest thing. Maybe there's a way to explain this. I don't know what it is. But this, again, goes to the heart now, not just with the perception of the TTPS, but with the criminal justice system on a whole, because now we're into trial and the process of trial. And yes, I understand that the majority of people involved in this are probably doing their job. And it's probably a minority that's doing something interesting. But it's going to reflect badly on most people involved, with the exception of any case that, you know, the public would have clear proof that they are not involved in any funny business. And it seems as though the same philosophies that was described in the papers yesterday, that was part of the deposition read on Tuesday, one squad, one song, that whole, you know, get the story right kind of thing. While obviously we're gone beyond that stage, the whole philosophy behind it, I do wonder if somehow it is still being applied, whether externally or maybe even internally. And take the implications of the statements over there. I'm not saying that it's the judge or the prosecutor or anything like that. But those ideologies, those ideas might still be at play here in some way, shape, or form. And it's difficult to have confidence in the situation as it is, because I'm pretty sure you don't see murder trials where a key witness has such differing testimony. That is allowed to go on the stand and do this, so then the defense counsel could come up and easily make the argument, well, which one is true? And since we have a doubt on the testimony of the individual, how can we be certain that either is true? It's very basic. So again, I have to ask, is this intentional? And who intended it? It might not be Nicole Clements herself. But this should have been something obvious from the prosecutor's side. They should have had this statement, and then she gives this testimony, which she would have probably given after some degree of preparation. So I'm waiting to see what will unfold. If it just ends here and the trial moves on to further evidence, I will be very, very surprised. But we'll see how it goes. Moving on to the next story. And this is an further updates from the situation with the Bank of Jamaica. Now, when the story initially broke, I didn't necessarily speak about it because there wasn't much to say at the time. Bank of Jamaica decided they're going to suspend reimbursing or suspend the exchange of TT dollars, right? So apparently, Bank of Jamaica will have the TT dollars repatriated. I can't remember the exact term used. To the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. And that was all we knew. The Bank of Jamaica just said, we're suspending it, that's it. It looks bad on the surface, we didn't necessarily know why. Then it later came out that, well, they did it because the central bank actually decided to suspend the arrangement between our central bank and the Bank of Jamaica. And now it's hard not to think, okay, we have controls with regards to our foreign exchange, we know this, and the central bank made a decision. It's hard to imagine that's anything good. So the Minister of Finance has basically said, well, this is drama over a small amount of forex, making a mountain out of a molehill, creating anxiety for no reason. And the reason why he said that is, I believe that, look, the amount traded in TT dollars in Jamaica equals only 4,000 US per month. But the key point in that phrase is the amount traded in TT dollars in Jamaica. In Jamaica. So is that the sum total of all TT dollars that the Bank of Jamaica has access to? Who's doing that trade? What's the definition of that? Although that's nitpicking. That's nitpicking. Here's the thing. The statement kind of contradicts itself in a way. If it's a small amount of money, why did the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago feel the need to suspend the arrangement in the first place? It's a small amount of money, right? Now, the thing is, if it's a technical reason, okay, maybe they need to suspend it temporarily because of some technical reason with regards to how the transactions were being processed, with regards to how the money was being exchanged, with regards to physical security, if physical currency was being moved, etc., etc. The security of lines of communication. Remember, TSTT, hacking, maybe all these things were under review. Some changes had to be done to the financial systems, updates needed to be made, so they needed to suspend some things. Now, we only heard of the Bank of Jamaica suspending their arrangement, or their end of it, because the central bank decided to suspend the arrangement from their end. We haven't necessarily heard from other neighbors or other countries in general, so it's hard for me to assume that, it's a technical reason, because why would a technical reason only affect one trading partner? I mean, maybe it is a technical reason specific to our dealings between the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago and the Bank of Jamaica. But, I mean, again, I am left to have to speculate and dig down to get to that reason. Meanwhile, it's not unfair to wonder, could there be another reason? Because we are at a time where foreign exchange is limited, and we have seen heavy controls both from the banks privately, but also, measures being taken by the government in order to try to keep our foreign exchange rate to the US dollar stable and remain where it is, to move with the barest of shifts, the smallest of shifts, right? It still hasn't reached $7 TT for $1 US yet, right? It's been above $6.50 for quite some time. So what are we left with? We're left with wondering, well, why exactly is 4,000 US dollars worth of trading, assuming that the technical definition of what the Minister of Finance is referring to does actually compute with the amount of money that the Central Bank of TT and the Bank of Jamaica utilize on a regular basis with regards to these transactions? 4,000 US a month. If it's so small, again, why was it suspended? What else is there that we're not being told? Because I would like to point out, even with the TSCT thing, right? The minister was technically not wrong, but there was wrong information, and I'll get into that when we hit that story this morning. But he was told certain things, and then how he was told it was technically not incorrect. There wasn't a ransomware attack because no ransom was demanded from TSCT unless new details emerge. I believe that still remains to be constant. But it doesn't mean that there wasn't a hack. It doesn't mean that these things didn't happen. It doesn't mean that certain fears were not experienced. So the minister was wrong. So again, technicalities, the accuracy of speech, the Minister of Finance is probably not going to lie directly, but it might be a case where, look, is what he's referring to the actual amount being referred to by the Bank of Jamaica and the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago? And more importantly, this is not he has failed to provide an actual explanation. If you want to prevent the mountain from a molehill, the quickest way to do that is to just tell us what's going on. I don't believe there are national security secrets here. So, even if there are things that you can't reveal, give us your reason why you can't reveal it. Give us something. But to just say, well, it's a small amount of money and it's a mountain out of molehill, again, I come back to the point for the third time. If the amount is so small, why did the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago have to suspend the arrangement that they had with the Bank of Jamaica? All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll finish off the daily review, and then we will be speaking to the communications pro himself. Stay tuned. This is Talk About a WSN, your content capital. We'll be right back.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
My name is Carl Media, and I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen, and stop me if you've heard this one before, but for a long time, too many WASA projects have failed because mismanagement within the organization. Does that sound surprising? Does that sound like new news? Nope, doesn't sound like new news to me. So now, at the commissioning of, I believe, 2 wells in Freeport, statements were made that basically imply, listen, 2024, it's time to turn over a new leaf. No more. No more will WASA accept shoddy work and delays and cost overruns, and they will hold contractors to account. They will hold, well, I assume also, their own people to account. But the freeness is done. Freeness is done at WASA because they have said it. They have said it, and it will be so, right? Well, here's the thing. First of all, I do have to ask, why now? I mean, WASA has an $80 million US loan from the Inter-American Development Bank, and one could argue, okay, they need to be a bit more transparent and have high accountability because this is not just our money that potentially could be wasted. This is a loan that has to be repaid, so, you know, they don't want any funny business there because then it might affect, not just has to be repaid, but it was meant for a specific purpose. So if the money is wasted, it might affect the ability to get loan financing, debt financing from similar institutions under similar circumstances and pretenses. Okay, fine, but this probably was not the first time and won't be the last. So again, why now? What makes now in November 2023 so special that we're going to finally clean up WASA's act? Because remember, when Petrotrin was more or less broken up, years ago, it was said WASA was next. Wassa was supposed to be next. And on Talking Point, now to be fair, we've had good communications with the Minister of Public Utilities, right? And he has faced the questions, and I understand that his position is not so simple. On one hand, he is the line minister, which means that a good chunk of his job is not making directives, but rather just being the conduit for cabinet, for government policy, and him being the public face and being the main communicator and doing a lot of the legwork, right? But at the same time, it was on the government's agenda. Or was it? Was the situation going to be so unpopular, or was it that nobody wanted to have to deal with the hassle after going through what they went through with Petrotrin, which has its detractors, has its supporters, and people in between, right? I think I would be now classified as in between now, that after calls from the professor and some of other viewers, as well as speaking to colleagues like Karen Shishera, there's more questions with regards to how the refinery was handled, it being used as collateral for severance packages on Petrotrin, and now being stuck with that debt, saddled with that debt. It's an asset that might just wither away. Ironically similar to the asset that was junk when it was sold to Nikwan, but we'll leave that there. And it makes me wonder, like I said, I was going to use this to kind of maybe further highlight a point that I've been making all this week and even before. To what extent did the government perceive interfering at Wassa as unpopular with the public? Which is ironic because the public is very much demanding that their water supply not be affected negatively by inefficiencies or deficiencies of the Water and Sewage Authority. But yet, it doesn't seem as though there's enough public support for any sort of significant change in Wassa to fix whatever the problems are. One of the problems that have been highlighted is the fact that it seems to be overbloated. It is alleged that a lot of nepotism has gone on. It was said that even after getting rid of redundant staff, or was that the port? I can't remember if it was the port or if it was Wassa. They got rid of redundant staff and then they just rehired back to overbloated levels. It might have been the port of Port of Spain. So I apologize for that. But for the most part, no one could say that Wassa is a lean, mean, efficient machine. And the figures came out not too long ago. The amount of managers in Wassa was just mind-boggling. So why now? Why did it take so long? And what guarantees do we have that 2024 will actually see different changes? Because notice what they're doing. They're saying the contractors outside of Wassa. We're not actually talking about Wassa. You know, once the contractors finish their work, the running and the maintenance of the assets, of the wells, of the pipes, etc., that generally might fall on Wassa. Even if they get an external contractor to do some of the work, it's still the overview of Wassa. So to what extent can we be confident this is going to make a difference? Now, the Minister of Public Utilities, he has, you know, to be fair, either supported or pushed through projects in Wassa to get more wells done around the country, Tobago and Trinidad, to improve the water supply, trying to keep up with demand. All the while having to deal with, you know, various challenges with failing infrastructure, emergency maintenance, etc. But I do wonder again, is this the government being timid? Because Wassa is a different situation, right? You don't want Wassa workers to strike and everything grinds to a halt, because then water grinds to a halt. But at the same time, is it that the government is too timid because they don't necessarily see the public support in order to do what might need to be done, to take strict action, to do whatever is needed to actually make Wassa into somewhat? It's not going to get perfectly there, right? Let's be real. No government agency could realistically be perfectly lean and mean and efficient. But we want WASA to have some amount of efficiency, some level of efficiency and professionalism in its operations. And leaving it alone is probably not the answer, or you're just waiting for people to retire. Or you're raising the retirement age, so that's going to take a little bit longer anyway. So at a time when water is critical, and when, we don't know, okay, the next dry season is supposed to be bad. El Nino coming in, and it might actually affect the amount of rainfall during the dry season negatively. That's all on the horizon and being monitored as our reservoir levels are already somewhat low. And this might not be a one-off experience. I remember a few years ago, there was a very bad dry season, but the corresponding dry seasons that came afterwards weren't so bad. Well, this may be the new normal. So then what? Business as usual is going to work. Floodwaters not being utilized notwithstanding. Where is the public saying this is a priority so that the government can then go to the PSA and say, listen, you all can do all the grandstanding you want, but this has to be done because we have a mandate from the people, as opposed to it appearing as though the government is just kind of doing their own thing. And then the PSA could then say in the press, this dictatorship is just out to get us. Maybe more communication is needed to the public to better understand what's going on with WASA, or maybe enough has happened, right? I leave that up to you. You could call in and tell me what you think about that later on. Let's try and wrap this up quick. As I mentioned in the story previously, I'll say it again. Stop me if you heard this before. Staff shortage in a public institution. This time it's with the Auditor General. And there's a 35% staff shortage. I think a lot of it apparently is lower level staff, not necessarily high level staff, but lower level positions within the Auditor General's department. And you can read the article yourselves. There's also a part where they mention that, listen, we find irregularities, but there are things like documents unprovided, contracts can't be seen with regards to issues that they find. So that has its own set of questions, and to what extent is the staff shortage affecting those issues and the ability to potentially run down, certain things. Once they find issues, at some point they have to give it to the fraud squad. They're not the investigative body. So my thing though is, are the staff shortages, because we've seen this with regards to customs, we've heard this with regards to teachers. Mariana Brown said it, the Minister of Finance might be the only one who could control costs or cut costs as revenue was reduced. That was a bit of praise, but now I have to wonder if there are staff shortages throughout multiple government institutions, is it because everybody was trying to cut costs? And now we have to deal with the problems of not having, ironically, just spoke about some institutions being bloated with employees, the reverse. Some institutions not having enough employees. One needs to ask, why is it similar to how we could have people with no access to running water in their pipes while the nation floods? We have some institutions, like the Port of Port of Spain potentially, and the Water and Sewage Authority, that is overblown with workers. Meanwhile, other institutions like the Office of the DPP, like the Auditor General's Department, look at the things we're talking about, like customs, have staff shortages. Some important things, right? Maybe it's because to fill those slots, everybody there would have to actually do work. It's not just I eat a food and I'll show up whenever I actually need to be seen, but otherwise I'm working from home. Still had to wait to see how this work from home policy is going to impact the public sector. But, okay, just mention the last story. The response to the data breach, I'll just say this, and maybe I'll have time later to elaborate. I find it's coming up short. I just find it's coming up short. It was the Prime Minister, then they say, no, it wasn't actually him, it was some other Keith Rowley, except there are multiple Keith Rowleys in the data breach, and it seems as though one is actually Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, right? That alone, that part of the response alone, where it seems like it's tried to be downplayed, and it could be a second-level staffer trying to downplay it to their bosses, who then pass that on to the ministers and the prime minister. But regardless, it undermines the response, in my opinion. I still don't think the CEO should be fired, maybe suspended. Will the probe be independent? Well, it's done by the board, not by the CEO, but maybe somebody else should have done the probe, to be honest. This is a national security issue. I don't know if the TSCT board should be doing the probe. Maybe somebody higher above that in the national security food chain should be making the decisions of the inquiry. I'm just saying. All right, let's cut things there. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to welcome my guest, the man of public relations himself. Stay tuned to Talk About on WSN. We'll be right back.
I am Rondell Donowa, attorney at law and host of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Strictly Legal is a legal program geared towards informing you, the public, of your legal rights, responsibilities, and remedies. So be viewing Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Site, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, one of the stories that I'm keeping a close eye on is the crime talks, or rather the talks before the talks. And as that unfolds, I have joining with me the Public Relations Officer of the UNC, the Communications Pro, as I call him, Dr. Kirk Mayhew. Good morning, Dr. Mayhew. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
So I want to get straight into it because I'll be upfront. I'm looking at the negotiations before we even get to the talks. And it seems as though, to some extent, both sides have points to make, but I'm questioning if either side is really working towards actually coming together, or if perhaps maybe they're just kind of hedging their bets so that they'll have an excuse when it fails to say, well, see, it's not our fault, it's their fault. Now, I understand a lot of the technical points being made, like the Prime Minister not even being a part of this stage of the situation, which is somewhat curious because he's not just the Prime Minister, he's the political leader of the PNM and the head of the National Security Council. Meanwhile, it seems as though, you all are sticking to his participation, and I don't know, I mean, is it practical? I also understand why you all want the political leader of the NTA. But enough from me. What do you make of it? Tell me, what is it that your party's intentions and perhaps what you think of the other side's intentions?
Well, I think you are absolutely right in terms of reading the government's intentions, but that's not the opposition's at all. They are clearly playing games because they keep moving the goalposts and they keep changing the terms as we move along. This is obviously not proceeding in good faith. So just to recap for the viewers who may not have had time or even seen the correspondence from the leader of opposition, but quickly, the Prime Minister wrote to the leader of opposition inviting us to have a team of 4 members and them to have a team of 4 members. Right? And we responded. Well, actually, the 4 members were, that was in the second letter. But we responded to the initial letter, so then he just had a short letter asking for 4 members. And then we responded because there were a lot of things that changed between the first and second letter. And let me just quickly recap them. There were 7, they came under 7 headings. So the first thing is it was a surprise to the whole country that he was not going to be part of the talks. So we asked him to clarify whether he'll be attending at all and leading the government's team. And if he wasn't, if he could give an explanation as to why. That's the first thing we just wanted clarified. The second one, sorry, the second one is that in the initial letter, he invited us to have 4 members and the government team to have 4 members. However, a change was made unilaterally, saying that the government had 5 members and that the opposition would be allowed only 4 members. I'm sorry. So we had asked whether that was a kind of drafting error, or is it an actual change in the policy? Because it's significant as we move on. And if it was a change in his offer and in the structure, why did he change it unilaterally without any discussion? So we wanted clarification on that. Is that actually what he wanted, or was that a mistake? And then the next thing we asked was that in the initial letter, they said 4 opposition members. Then, in the second letter, they said 4 opposition parliamentarians. Again, we want to know, was that a change that you meant? Was that a drafting error? Was that a secretarial error? And if it is a change that you meant, to please explain why and why you did so unilaterally. The next thing is that the government proposed to incorporate the external stakeholders by a majority vote. So this is why it seems they have the 5-4. So in other words, the government would have a veto on who comes in and who doesn't. And so we want them to confirm that that is their intention, because we definitely believe that this should not be a process of just the opposition and government in secret meetings we don't think the population would like that or buy that, and how would that be substantially different from what goes on in Parliament? And in fact, and another clarification, number 6, we asked is if they did approach people, in other words, did they want certain people and not want other people? And finally, when we had asked about, well, the government had asked us for our own ideas, programs, and policies, and we gave them some, which he said was too voluminous. Believe me, we had 100 pages of documents, but we decided not to reveal that as yet. He thought 7 pages was too much, and what they gave was merely a rehash of legislation that was already tabled in the House and failed. So they're narrowing and limiting the scope, but our whole idea is that this has to be beyond the parliamentary process. We're talking about putting all hands on deck. We're talking about an entire holistic approach to crime, including education, training, economic opportunities, social programs, the whole gamut of both executive and legislative measures. But they are changing the goalposts constantly and narrowing the discussion. So the Prime Minister has not responded to any of those concerns. The AG wrote, giving a deadline of today. I don't know why the AG, how the AG inserted himself and what gave him the right to impose a deadline on this. They have not even responded to the letter sent on the 14th of October, and it is now, it's almost November 14th, November 9th now. So they are clearly playing games. They are moving the goalposts, they are narrowing the agenda. Instead of if we just stuck with the terms of the initial letter, we would have been well on our way to the talks. But so we have to be very, very, very sort of assiduous about moving forward and make sure that the process moves forward, because they seem like they want to stymie it.
Well, Dr. Mayu, I will say this. I'm not too concerned about the narrowing of the agenda, because I could see where, look, in the short term, we could focus on crime, on police measures and crime-fighting measures, and leave the long-term approaches at a later date. Of course, that is me applying that reasoning. I did not see that anywhere, right? So I am just making an assumption there. But that's why I'm not too concerned about that part. But you made a very good point with regards to the authority of the AG, because the government essentially, on a technical level, proposed, one could argue, he chaired the meeting, but since this is supposed to be bilateral talks between two sides, the government's majority in Parliament doesn't necessarily give them the right to dictate the meeting. It's not an official parliamentary function or government function. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, if you could tell me, because it seems as though one of the things I asked was, well, what happens if the UNC does not respond by October the 9th? What's going to happen? Are you just going to put a cancel on the whole thing? Was anything said with regards to if you don't respond? Because to me, this seems like one of the most lame duck deadlines I have ever heard of in my life. It's literally just there for the sake of being there. How are you going to enforce it? Why do you even have the right to enforce it? So did they even give you any indication with regards to that?
No, they didn't. As far as I am aware, they haven't. It is, to me, it just seems a way for them to scuttle the talks. You can tell from the very moment he issued his letter, he did so reluctantly. It appears, I mean, from my perspective, it appears he only did so because his presidential nominee, Christine Kangu, had made a point at the opening of Parliament. He did not seem at all concerned for this, and that's the whole thing. They're playing politics with everything, whether it be education, policy, crime. They do not want to be, I don't know, shown up, but they don't want to say that, oh, we need the opposition. All they want to do is basically blame the opposition, but not actually involve us.
I want to ask on two issues. The first one being the Prime Minister's involvement. Is that a deal breaker for your side? Because one, from my perspective, he's the head of the National Security Council. He made great pains to point that out when the merit list debacle was in, at its height of media coverage. One would think that he is also, the head of the executive. You want to make decisions, you need him there. Is his participation somewhat mandatory for the UNC, for the opposition to take part in these talks? Otherwise, it might not seem legitimate. And is there any question about the participation of some of the other members, such as, say, the Tourism and Culture Minister, or I can't remember, the Public Utilities Minister, whose portfolios aren't necessarily directly related to the narrowing focus that you're saying the PNM is narrowing the focus? If it's the wider focus, then maybe arts and culture might have a place, maybe even public utilities. That's a stretch. But is there any concerns about the participation and the Prime Minister's lack of participation?
Those are excellent observations. It just, to us, shows the lack of seriousness that they're approaching this with. So Keith Rowley does not think that he needs to be there. This is the most important crisis facing our country right now. We can't do anything if we don't have a safe and secure society. We can't have a properly functioning economy. We can't have a properly functioning society. Never before in our history have we faced such levels of anarchy and murder. And not just last year's record, this year it looks like we're going to surpass that record.
So does he have to participate? Is that a deal breaker at the end of the day?
We have not laid any sort of ultimatums like that because we want the crime, we want to address the situation and we are serious about it. So we have not put in any ultimatums, right? So we have not. But certainly we want him there. We want him there and we are not going to play politics with it. On that respect.
Well, Dr. May, I'll just point out you do need to be careful with the consistency of your message. One of your own vice chairman, she had a political message to say. So I'm not going to necessarily hold the UNC, strictly to what she said, but she basically said maybe it's better that he's not there. So I just, I like to just point that out, right? The idea behind the message was somewhat consistent with what you're saying, but the conclusion to the message is quite divergent. But I want to move on, as we're out of time. Political leader of the NTA, he's a former Minister of National Security, former Commissioner of Police, divisive but still popular in his time as Commissioner of Police. Does he need to be a participating member, or will the opposition be fine with him just being a advisor in the background?
Well, we want to we need to discuss that further. We want the points raised in our letter to the Prime Minister to be addressed first, whether it's members or parliamentarians and why the change. So that's a major one, and about the veto as well. So because as the structure is laid out, if it were that there were opposition members, and if it were that the joint team can agree to persons coming on, then there can be a way for the NTA leader, Captain Gary Griffiths, to be part of it. But if they are doing all these maneuvers to ensure that he is not part of it, well, so we don't know what the Prime Minister's answers to our questions are. So I don't want to presume at the moment. Let us hear what he has to say. To us directly, not what he says on a platform, not what he says to the newspaper. What is he going to say to us in a direct letter, in direct communication? We don't want to have to infer it from other places. Right? So let it be proper communication.
And folks, that's why I call him the communications pro. He is the public relations officer of the UNC. Dr. Mayhew, we are out of time, but I'd like to thank you for joining me. It's always an interesting conversation to have with you, and I always appreciate the candor.
Thank you, and I appreciate the discussion.
Folks, we have to take a break for news on the hour. When we return, we open the phone lines, and you could dig into this interview or anything else that I've said on this show. Give your opinion, right, wrong, what do you think of it? What was said? Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sira Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. CARICOM and Foreign Affairs Minister to advocate for resolution in Palestine-Israel conflict. 5-year-old girl left in hot vehicle, recovering well, says authorities. Corporal and 5 police constables face interview in money allegations probe. Regionally, state of emergency declared in St. James, Jamaica amid escalating violence. Now for the details. Dr. Amory Brown, the head of government business in the Senate and the Minister of CARICOM and Foreign Affairs, has declared his intent to vigorously advocate for a resolution to the Palestine-Israel conflict during an upcoming meeting of the CARICOM Council for Foreign and Community Relations scheduled for Wednesday. This statement came in response to a matter raised during the Senate's adjournment on Tuesday by Independent Senator Anthony Vieira. The issue at hand pertains to the provision of assistance to nationals residing in the Middle East who are vulnerable due to the intensifying conflict between Gaza and Israel. In his address, Senator Vieira expressed deep concern over the distressing pain and suffering experienced by individuals on both sides of the conflict.
This conflict doesn't just threaten security and stability in and around Gaza. If left unchecked, it can escalate into a greater war, which would be extremely dangerous. In the event, I am concerned about our nationals in the Middle East who may be at risk by the escalating conflict. Accordingly, I call on the government to continue working with CARICOM and other responsible members of the international community in pressing for an immediate ceasefire, for the provision of life-saving assistance to those in need, and for all steps to be taken that would reduce the chances for a wider regional war.
A 5-year-old girl who was rushed to hospital after being unintentionally left in a vehicle for 2 hours is reported to be making significant progress in her recovery. Hospital authorities have indicated that she is expected to be discharged later this week. The child, currently under the care of the San Fernando General Hospital, has been transferred out of the intensive care unit and is now placed under observation. Her initial admission to the medical facility followed an unfortunate incident that occurred around 2 p.m. on October 29th near Queen Anne Road in Superior. The child's family had been attending a funeral at the Superior Seventh-day Adventist Church when a female relative responsible for the child and other children unintentionally left her in the vehicle. A corporal and 5 police constables are slated to undergo interviews today as part of an ongoing investigation into accusations of receiving money from an individual they had arrested. According to a report, a team of officers from the Interagency Task Force and the Guard and Emergency Branch, operating under the oversight of the Professional Standards Bureau, conducted a visit to the Aruca Police Station on Tuesday with the purpose of apprehending the officers. All of the implicated officers are currently assigned to the Northern Central Division Task Force and are facing allegations of receiving money from an individual they had apprehended, reportedly in exchange for his release. These allegations, as stated by a senior police source, are being regarded as potential misconduct. Regionally, Prime Minister Andrew Holness has officially announced the imposition of a state emergency in St. James, just days after the tragic murders of 2 schoolboys in the parish. The Prime Minister revealed this development during a post-cabinet press briefing at Jamaica House. The decision to declare the state of emergency comes in response to a surge in gun-related violence and notably the shooting deaths of 3 individuals, including 2 schoolboys, on Monday in the Western Parish. Holness emphasized the government's unwavering commitment to addressing the escalating violence, stating, "We will not wilt, we will not resile in the face of terror." The declaration of the SOE, which came into effect at midnight, was made following a recommendation by the security forces. This move reflects the government's determination to restore peace and security in the affected region. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I am Sira Ali. Thank you for watching.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. So, if you're now joining the program, I just had the Public Relations Officer of the UNC speaking about the crime talks and pointing out where he thinks that, well, it's the government trying to hedge their bets, not so much the UNC. And to some extent, I could see that in part because it seems as though the UNC has not necessarily committed to anything yet. Now, one could argue the lack of committal could be seen as a sign that, when I say committed to anything, committed to demands or committed to terms, this is our bottom line, this far, no further. But the flip side is a lack of commitment, a wait-and-see approach could also, be considered a sign that, look, you're not actually committed to seeing this thing through. But given the way how things are going, I'll have to wait and see if how that turns out. Because the government has some very specific issues or terms that they have laid out, and it's on the surface, it does leave one with a lot of questions and makes the situation seem quite tiring overall. But the PRO, he did not necessarily try to defend when I pointed out that Khadija Amin, it doesn't seem like she wanted Prime Minister there, so you could say you want the Prime Minister there, but she doesn't seem to want the Prime Minister there. So, hopefully they'll be a bit more careful with their messaging. And hopefully, as I always point out, I would like the government to be a bit more careful with their communication, but we'll see how that goes. It's not so easy for me to get the Public Relations Officer of the PNM to speak to me so that I can make these points out to him. If he was here, I would make those points, but he is not here. Folks, not my fault. Now, let's open the phone lines for you, the viewer, so you can have your say on what has been said, what I said, what the PRO said. I'm sure that there will be people who will have issues with what the PRO said. Some will be diehards. Some will be people in the middle, moderate people, undecided voters, and that's fine. Call in. Let me hear what you have to say. I'll give my best opinion on it. And of course, that's not going to be the be-all and end-all of everything, but we'll keep the conversation going. Talking Point is basically what I would call the first step to get us talking about these issues and then trying to improve the conversation on the issues, and then hopefully we could see some tangible benefit throughout society, in Parliament, in the politicians, in our civic leaders, but we'll have to wait and see. We have our first caller, I think from Penal. Good morning, caller, you on here?
Yeah, morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I have a comment to make concerning water. Mm-hmm. I have had an experience recently where I didn't get water for 21 days, right? And I was told that because of the desal, etc., that, we would have had some delay, etc. But the problem at the end of the day, I am on a 10-day cycle. So even though I didn't get over 21 days, I have to go back to a 10-day cycle. And my question is that why or what is being done about my area and my issues? I live at Fine Village Pinal, and every 10 days I am in this schedule. And I'm wondering, and this for a couple of years, I'm asking the question from my MP, whatever, what is the plans in place for reducing my 10 days to, let me see, I've asked for 1 day in 5 days at least. And I'm not getting that. And then I'm given a schedule, of course, which they didn't keep, with a 4-hour supply. And in my area, it takes approximately 2 days for some of the residents to get water. Why? Because by the time some of those in the front of the line get water and fill their tanks, the others take about 2 days. So here you have 21 days, and then you're telling me in 4 hours they're giving me water. Of course, it didn't happen, right? What happened is that, fortunately, they give us water for 2 days. But I'm saying at the end of the day, what is being done about my problem? And the next question is this. If you have problems delivering service, quality service to people, how can staff reduction be the answer?
Well, I could answer that. Or at least in general, I could answer that. So thank you, caller. I'll have to end that there. I'll answer that question and then I'll take the next caller. Basically speaking, just because we have staff doesn't mean that the staff is all working where we need them to work and where we need the work to be done. So at some point in time, you don't need 400 managers, right? One could argue. Also, a lot of the deficiencies at WASA could be more with regards to infrastructure, equipment, and supply, and not necessarily with staff. Having 50% or even just 10% extra staff, however much extra staff it is not actually going to get us the supply. And when the things like what happened in North Trinidad in July with the treatment plant having to have emergency repairs, at some point you can't just add more bodies to a single pipe to fix it faster. At some point, physically, there just is no more room. So the other thing is, yes, the management is an issue. So is that staff even being used efficiently? So I understand your concerns, but I think it's on a technical level, it's a bit more complex than that. I will comment on the water schedule that you're experiencing and needing to get that sorted out after. We have a caller from St. Anne's first. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Dr. Megu is an interesting character. He's an interesting political grasshopper because a lot of people have forgotten what he said about the UNC when he was the head of his own political party.
Yes.
And on very few occasions when he's in the media today representing the UNC, very few people or analysts in the media actually call him out on that. But that's not actually why I called today. I wanted to address the headline in the Express today, where the permanent secretary is alleged to have been transferred to another location. And I must say Dr. Rowley is taking a page from the great Dr. Eric Williams' playbook, in where notoriously a number of permanent secretaries ended up in Whitehall in a room with nothing to do because they dared challenge either him directly or his ministers. So this is practically playing out of that playbook. The thing about Dr. Rowley's approach here is that while he has access to the media, the permanent secretary cannot go to the media to let their side of the story be known. Otherwise, they could forever be put up on a disciplinary charge. And let's be clear about this. Permanent secretaries throughout the public service, even when they are performing in an acting capacity, are very well trained. If that permanent secretary, as the stories in the media suggest, had an issue with the workforce being properly prepared to handle this load of back pay for all those persons in their particular ministry, I'm sure they would have documented it in a way that made sense. And let's not forget something that nobody has actually brought up. This is a critical time of the year where a lot of public officers and citizenry as a whole tend to take time off because of Diwali and with that absenteeism in the work.
Caller? All right. I think we lost that caller. We do have another caller waiting from from Aruka. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Just calling on two matters. Could you tell me how come the companies that producing, selling water don't have a problem in getting water from WASA? And the next issue I understand that tonight might be the Prime Minister Diwali celebration. And the largest organization representing Hindus with the largest amount of schools, temple, and so forth was not invited. Could you put some light on that for me, please? Thank you.
Well, caller, the second question that you had, it will be pure speculation. It would be pure speculation. And at the end of the day, it would probably amount to politics and optics, right? This is assuming that that organization did not turn down the government because while I'm not saying that this is what they did, to some extent, I could understand if they don't want to be part of anything that the Prime Minister does, right? I could understand that. But that's not to say that they made that decision. I'm just putting that possibility out there. Would that be the right decision? That could be debated, maybe. But I could understand the mindset that could lead to a decision like that. Now, with that said, it probably is political because the last thing you want is some sort of public relations fiasco in what should be just bread and butter. Let's just roll out the red carpet and have nice things to say and look good in front of the cameras and everybody celebrates and it's nice and everybody have a nice time and blah, 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 blah. This is not no hard political issue per se. Also, there's always the argument from some quarters in whatever the event is, whether it's a public event, a private event, whether it's getting guests on a talk show, that, you know, let's highlight the smaller, lesser-known people. There's always that sentiment as well. That could be an excuse to say, well, let's not deal with, you know, the Mahasabha. But it is what it is. It's hard not to think that it's political, right? The perception or the possibility is there, and it's not reasonable to discount that out of hand. With regards to companies that sell bottled water, I believe is what you're asking about. I'm not sure if there's private water trucks you're speaking about. Basically, they probably put their plants where the water supply is more stable, it's more consistent, because our water supply nationally is not one system unified, right? It is a multitude of smaller systems, so some of which would, you know, be more consistent than others. And that's basically all. And then they themselves might also have large amounts of water tanks so that the plants themselves could keep working even if the water supply has interruptions. Just like private homes would have water tanks. We have a call on the line from Shogunas. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
Okay, sure.
Morning, Professor.
I see the Prime Minister say that the public servants who believe they could do what they want. That is the most asinine statement I have heard. A public servant is supposed to carry out the laws of the country under the oversight of the cabinet, of which he is the head. And there is a procedure where every public servant have a supervisor to see what is done. And if something is wrong, he should say what he has done about it. The case she's talking about is where they say they're going to pay some back pay, I think, by December.
Mm-hmm.
And our permanent secretary say with the staff they have, they can't do that until May. And he moved his permanent secretary. And then he moved a set of staff into this thing, which shows the stupidity of our politicians. Right? And I have repeatedly made this statement that all our problems we have in this country, at least for this century, is due to our prime ministers not doing their job. Both sides. Any questions, sir?
No. I was going to address it. Thanks for your contribution, because although I will say this though, Professor, before you leave, I understand your sentiments that, you know, every public servant was our supervisor. I do think there's something. Sorry, what was that? I do think there was something there, though, with regards to the Prime Minister's frustrations. But I will agree with you, and how he handled the matter was probably not the best way. Because, thank you, Professor, because that whole thing about transferring, I'm of two minds of it. And as one of the callers previously pointed out, I think it might have been St. Anne's, I can't remember exactly, the permanent secretary who was transferred has no capacity to give his side of events, right? We just heard that he told the minister no. And, you know, it's come out that it wasn't the minister, it wasn't the permanent secretary of finance, it was the permanent secretary of education, because education and national security are apparently the two main areas that's going to get the back pay due to the wage negotiations and them accepting, their unions accepting the 4%, right? So we don't know exactly, and I think I did mention this before, what was the reason, what was the conditions, the context of that no, right? And also, as the caller pointed out, you know, you might get a lot of people trying to go and leave in the public sector right now. So is that affecting staffing, which could affect the capacity to get this done? Because it's not as though every year there's back pay being paid on December. So this is not something that they could have planned for in advance, right? Although one could think maybe when it was decided to do this exercise, planning should have been made. But again, it's when they're actually given the directives. Probably it was after the budget was read, the budget statement, the budget presentation. So I could be wrong about that. That's not necessarily the case. It all depends on how they want to handle their communications. If people are told in advance and it could be leaked, and then politicians don't like it when it's leaked because then it takes the wind out of their sails. The minister wants to make his budget presentation so he could, you know, frame it the way he wants to frame it and reap the benefits of the appeasement of the masses, because he said it first, so they will look upon him with favor. But it brings us to, well, the real issue now, and which is with regards to disciplining and holding to account permanent secretaries and other members of the public sector in similar positions. The government can't necessarily do anything about it at times, and as Karen Nishishera pointed out, to be fair, you need to have people working with you that you could trust to carry out your agenda, right? That statement doesn't mean that she or myself necessarily agree with the government with how they handle the situation. It's just that's the background reasonable explanation. So let's just assume that the permanent secretary is in the wrong. Well, all they have available to do is to transfer him out. And to some extent, even if there is justifiable reason to do so, I don't like this precedent at all. And this is not the first time we brought this up on Talking Point, but we haven't had much of a chance to bring it up in the past before. So just transfer permanent secretaries out kind of undermines the whole point of giving them job security. And what it does, we've seen this before, we've heard of this before, where you've had permanent secretaries basically trying to rein in the politicians from doing things that might be a little too crazy or a little too unreasonable, you know? It's like, we really shouldn't be doing this, you know. You know, in my professional opinion, because the permanent secretary is potentially the leading technocrat in the ministry, the elected official is not. The elected official comes there and basically meets people there, meets experts there. The permanent secretary is the one kind of managing the ship, not the captain of the ship, the boatswain, officer of the deck, chief of the boat, you know, who is important for the continuity of the ministry's work. And then, you know, when that continuity might be upended due to a political agenda, which might not be always the most constructive thing in the world, the permanent secretary does have a duty to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this, this might not be a good idea. And then at some point now, when does the permanent secretary take a stand on principle and put his or her foot down? And then the government they just transfers them out and puts somebody else, and it's almost as though you're fired, right? Because you move to a different ministry where you're not experienced with dealing with the issues, the people, the processes. So how effective could that person be there? You know, and similar things happen. I mean, at the end of the day, look, transfers are used in the police service because when officers are under suspicion, they don't want to take a polygraph to confirm that they're clean, so they transfer them out to special units. And this is basically a form of punishment that kind of undermines the HR system in the public sector, in the TTPS. And I get it, maybe the constraints are too much, but rather than doing something unofficial or workaround, because what I always say, when you use workarounds and use these unofficial measures that undermine the actual rules in place, why are we then surprised that the cracks start to open up and widen, and then corruption just kind of starts to peer through and leak out? As the situation gets further undermined, it becomes more and more corrupt, or the potential for it to become more and more corrupt continues. And this is just one sign, because I believe the caller and the professor more or less was alluding to the fact that, look, government is not supposed to have certain levels of control over certain aspects of the public service. They're supposed to have a certain degree of independence, but of course, with the understanding that at the end of the day, they are to execute the agenda of the government of the day. As Karen Shishera said, I believe more than once, and we're seeing now, we're seeing in certain other parts of the world, to our north, where politics are interfering with independent institutions, and it's causing a major division in that nation. And some people might be a little too short-sighted and think it's a good thing, when in reality it's a bad thing, because look at our own division and imagine it getting worse. And that's what's going on in other nations, right? So I don't like it. I don't like it that we don't know if it's justified straight off the bat to do anything to this permanent secretary at all, or to have a negative opinion of the permanent secretary, of his statement. And then now, even if we could say that the permanent secretary was 100% wrong, this whole, well, what we're going to do, we're going to transfer him out. There needs to be something better officially so that these situations could be resolved properly and more efficiently, and not just kind of this bypass of the system. This is a bad idea, because we cannot be sure that similar things will not happen for purely political reasons. This already is political enough. This already is political enough, because the government had a budget, and let's be real, the back pay, that's the government trying to do something for the people, so that the people can say, yeah, the government, yeah. So they want the people to be happy. They're doing this thing. They don't want to be told no. Right? Now, to be fair, to what extent is it a political operation that's unnecessary, and to what extent is it very much needed by the people who will be recipients of this back pay? You could debate that. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. So I don't like this precedent at all. This is not a precedent defining or setting move, but it's certainly a reinforcing move. And I don't like it at all. It's similar to the PH taxis. We don't want to do things properly. We just kind of want to, wing it. Want to do some wajang thing. And then we kind of have to wonder, why is it that our systems and our regulations and our rules and our governing bodies and systems of accountability, why is it that they just don't seem to be working? I don't understand why. Meanwhile, we're undermining it any chance we get due to convenience. All right, folks, that's the end of my time. I want to thank all our callers. I want to thank my guest, Dr. May, who, as my course always says, today can be a good day. We could make it if we try. But if we really want TNT to prosper, we have to start from today. And folks, we will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.